There's a forest they don't mark on maps, a place locals refuse to name. It's not because they've forgotten. It's because they remember. Too many have vanished there, swallowed by shadows that move when they shouldn't, by whispers that call your name even when you're alone. They say the forest watches. They say it waits. And when it chooses you, there's no way out. They warned us, stay away. They told us it wasn't safe. But warnings, they're like bait, aren't they? For the curious, the fearless, or the foolish, they're impossible to resist. And so, 3 lives became lessons, carved into the trees of this cursed place. Tonight, you'll hear their stories. And by the end, you'll understand why no one comes back. The first, a group of friends who thought the rules didn't apply to them. They laughed at the warnings, but laughter fades quickly when the dark begins to close in. The second, a hunter who believed he was the predator until the forest proved otherwise. And the third, a lost hiker who thought she could find her way back. But some paths lead only to despair. These are the stories they tried to bury. But the forest remembers. And tonight, you will too. In the remote corners of Sacramento, there's a forest that even the boldest won't venture into. Known as the Whispering Woods, it sits like a scar on the land, a place so steeped in fear and mystery that its name is spoken only in hushed tones. But its reputation wasn't born from rumors. No, the stories are all too real. The air here is different, thicker, colder. People say the silence isn't just quiet, it's oppressive. It presses against your chest, making you feel like you're not welcome. Or worse, like you're being watched. Those who have entered describe the same unsettling feeling, an unnatural stillness, where not even birds dare to sing. Footsteps echo louder than they should, and every sound, every snap of a twig or crunch of leaves, feels magnified, like it's not just you making the noise. Legends of haunted forests exist all over the world. The Black Forest in Germany, where the Brothers Grimm drew inspiration for their darkest tales. Japan's Aokigahara, the Sea of Trees, where many enter and never return. And now, this place, the Whispering Woods, has become one of those infamous locations. A place where the lines between myth and reality blur. The first recorded disappearance here dates back to the late 1800s. A family of settlers vanished without a trace, their wagon found tipped over near the edge of the forest. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. Just their belongings, abandoned. In the years that followed, hunters, hikers, even loggers began to go missing. Dozens over decades. Some bodies were eventually found, but their condition was anything but natural. Imagine stepping into a place where the very air feels wrong. The smell of damp earth is tainted with something metallic, something sharp. The trees, ancient and gnarled, seem to lean closer as you walk, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. And the deeper you go, the more you feel it, the weight of the forest itself, drawing you in. You think you hear movement behind you, just beyond the edge of the trail. You stop, you turn, and there's nothing there. But the feeling doesn't go away. Your heart pounds louder. Every instinct screams for you to leave. But somehow, your feet keep moving forward. The Whispering Woods isn't just a forest. It's something else. Something alive. And it's been waiting for you. Story 1. the thrill seekers. Mark, Lila, and Chris were inseparable. They were the kind of friends who thrived on daring each other to do the impossible. Mark, ever the skeptic, dismissed the stories of the Whispering Woods as nothing more than local superstition. Lila, the quiet believer, had heard enough warnings from her grandmother to know better, but peer pressure was a powerful thing. And Chris lived for adrenaline. For him, this wasn't a haunted forest, it was an adventure waiting to happen. They planned to spend one night in the forest to debunk the myths, as Mark called it. They ignored the faded "no trespassing" sign at the trailhead and pressed deeper into the woods. The first few hours were uneventful, almost peaceful, but that didn't last. Chris was the first to notice the symbols. "Probably just some kids messing around," Mark scoffed, but Lila felt uneasy. The air had changed. It was colder now, and there was a smell, foul, metallic, and sharp, like the tang of rusted iron. As the fire crackled, Mark joked about the so-called haunted woods, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her flashlight revealing nothing but trees. "You're imagining things," Chris said, though even his voice sounded less certain as the night deepened. And then they heard it. A whisper, soft and indistinct, carried on the wind. They froze. It wasn't coming from one direction, it was all around them. "Did you hear that?" Lila whispered. But none of them wanted to answer. Their laughter was gone now, replaced by fear. The forest seemed to close in, the trees pressing closer. When the first scream tore through the night, they thought it was a joke. But the sound was too raw, too full of terror to be fake. They ran. In their panic, they didn't stick together. Mark veered left, toward what he thought was the trail. Lila stayed by the fire, her flashlight flickering. And Chris vanished into the darkness, his shouts echoing from every direction at once. Mark stumbled onto a clearing. At its center stood an abandoned cabin, its roof sagging, its walls covered in the same symbols they'd seen on the trees. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside. The air was heavy, the smell worse than before. And the artifacts, twisted dolls, strange carvings, and jars filled with things he didn't dare identify lined the shelves. Lila, meanwhile, stayed by the fire. But she wasn't alone. Shadowy figures began to emerge from the darkness, circling her. Their forms were indistinct, their faces hidden. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The whispers grew louder, filling her head, drowning out her thoughts. Chris's voice came again, faint and distorted, calling for help. Lila turned toward the sound, only to see nothing. The forest was empty, but his voice came closer, closer, until it was right behind her. Only Lila made it out. She stumbled into town at dawn, covered in scratches and mud. She couldn't remember how she escaped, only that the shadows stopped following her once the sun rose. But when she cleaned herself up, she noticed something new, a mark on her arm, a symbol she'd seen carved into the trees. It pulsed, dark and alive, like the forest itself had claimed her. She thought she was free. But the forest doesn't let go that easily. Story 2, The Hunter. Jack was no stranger to the woods. A seasoned hunter with decades of experience, he'd trekked through countless forests, braved countless dangers, and laughed off every tale of haunted places. To him, the Whispering Woods was just another patch of land, another hunting ground ripe for exploration. But this time, the forest wasn't the one being hunted. Jack was the kind of man who believed in hard facts and sharp instincts. Legends and ghost stories were for the weak-minded, he often said. When locals warned him about the Whispering Woods, he waved them off with a gruff laugh. A forest is just trees and animals, he'd say. But as the old saying goes, arrogance blinds a man to danger. Jack had heard about the disappearances, the strange sightings, and the whispered warnings. But he dismissed it all. He had one goal in mind: to track the elusive deer-like creature that locals claimed roamed these woods. It was bigger than any animal they'd seen, with antlers like a crown and eyes that glowed in the dark. For Jack, it wasn't just a hunt, it was a challenge. The tracks were fresh, leading him further than he'd ever gone. At first, everything felt normal. The familiar crunch of leaves beneath his boots. The sharp scent of pine. But as the hours passed, the forest began to change. It started small. The occasional rustle in the bushes, too loud to be the wind. The feeling of eyes on his back, though no one was there. Then came the footprints. They followed his, matching his rhythm perfectly. He stopped. They stopped. He moved. They moved. Always just out of sight. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. Trees seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, their positions subtly different. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that disappeared when he blinked. And then he found it, the village. It wasn't on any map. A forgotten settlement, rotting in the heart of the forest. The air was suffocating here, thick with the stench of decay. And yet, it felt inhabited. As though the forest itself was watching through the empty windows and broken doors. Jack pressed on, determined to find the creature. The tracks led him to a clearing bathed in moonlight. There, standing perfectly still, was the deer, or so he thought. It was massive, its antlers stretching impossibly wide, its body unnaturally still. But when it turned to face him, he realized his mistake. Before he could fire, it moved, faster than anything he'd ever seen. Jack stumbled back, his heart pounding as the thing circled him. And then it spoke. It didn't have a voice of its own. It used his. "Jack, why are you here?" it whispered, mimicking his tone perfectly, its laughter echoing through the clearing. It chased him, its footsteps impossibly light, its laughter growing louder. No matter how fast he ran, it was always just behind him, close enough that he could feel its breath on his neck. It didn't want to catch him. It wanted to break him. He thought he was safe. The cabin was sturdy, the door locked, his rifle loaded. But the forest has ways of getting in. The whispers started again, faint at first, then louder. They came from inside the cabin. The next morning, Jack's hunting partner arrived to check on him. The cabin was empty. No sign of a struggle, no tracks leading away. Just Jack's boots neatly placed by the door, and a single, bloody handprint smeared across the wood. Story 3: The Lost Hiker. Anna was no stranger to hiking alone. She found peace in the solitude, an escape from the chaos of her city life. But this time, her usual sense of calm would betray her. The Whispering Woods doesn't care if you're careful, it just waits. Anna had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But she wasn't superstitious. She laughed at the idea of ghosts and curses. To her, the forest was just a place. A beautiful, untamed stretch of wilderness she wanted to conquer. So, when she spotted a faint trail veering off the main path, she didn't think twice. She told herself she'd find her way back in no time. But what Anna didn't know was that in the Whispering Woods, the path you choose might be your last. At first, it was just little things. Her phone battery, full that morning, drained completely without warning. Her compass needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. And the trail, it vanished. She kept walking, convinced she'd find her way back. But the forest had other plans. No matter which way she went, the trees seemed to close in tighter, the shadows growing darker. That's when the signs began to appear. A doll, hand-sewn and weathered, hanging from a tree by a string. Its head tilted as though watching her. Then came the clearing. A perfect circle of earth, littered with bones arranged in unnatural patterns. Skulls stared up at her, their empty sockets seeming to follow her every move. She tried to leave, but her steps led her back, over and over again. The forest had her. By now, panic had set in. Anna's steps grew frantic, her breath shallow. She stumbled over roots and branches, desperate to escape. That's when she heard it, a voice. She couldn't understand the words, but the sound pierced her mind, filling her with dread. The figure's chant grew louder as it stepped closer, its face hidden in shadow. Anna screamed, but the sound seemed to vanish into the void. She ran, the trees closing in tighter with every step. The forest was no longer just a place, it was alive, bending and twisting to trap her. And no matter how far she went, she kept returning to the same spot, the clearing, empty now, but suffocating in its silence. Anna was never found. Weeks later, a search party stumbled upon her backpack near the edge of the forest. Inside, they found her journal, its final pages scrawled in shaky handwriting. Her words were the only clue to what happened. But the search party didn't stay long. They said the forest felt wrong, as though it was watching. And when they left, they swore they heard it too, the whispers. 3 tales, 3 warnings. The Whispering Woods isn't just a place, it's a predator. Do you dare to enter? Tell us in the comments if you've ever felt the forest watching you. And if you want more stories to keep you awake at night, like, subscribe, and join us next time, if you're brave enough. 3 tales, 3 warnings. The thrill seekers who laughed at the forest, the hunter who thought he was untouchable, the hiker who believed she could outwit the unknown. All of them learned the truth too late. The Whispering Woods isn't just a place. It's not a legend, not a story, not a warning. It's alive. And it's waiting. So, what do you think? Are these just tales meant to scare children, or is the forest truly a predator, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to step inside? Whatever you believe, remember this: some warnings aren't just words, they're survival. Now it's your turn. Which of these stories sent chills down your spine? Tell us in the comments below. Was it the thrill seeker's fateful night, the hunter's horrifying discovery, or the hiker's haunting loop? If you enjoyed these tales, hit that like button and subscribe for more nights filled with fear, mystery, and the unknown. Your engagement fuels our exploration into the darkest corners of the world. And if you've ever had a spine-chilling experience of your own, share it with us. Who knows? Your story could be featured in our next video. Until then, beware the woods.